відпустці.
Що вам не безпеці?
Ні, так хорошо.
Добрий день.
Good afternoon. We start our working day at Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and our topic for today, a year of decentralization. What has changed? Our guests are Iryna Bekeshkina, Ilko, Kucheriv Democratic Initiatives Foundation, Yuriy Hanushchak, Director of the Institute of Development of Territories, Mariya, Levonova, Coordinator of Development of Center UA, Lukeria, Manager of Citizens of Action of the Ukrainian Center for Independent Political Research, and Oleksiy Sydorchuk, Political Analyst of the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiative Foundations. Welcome. Democratic Initiative Foundation observe the implementation of the reform because we believe that this reform will drive all other reforms, and we believe that it also contributes to the reform on independent assessment, and we assessed the attitude towards this reform, and we carried out a national survey, and we put the same questions as 1 year ago, and now we want to have some conclusions. And the success of the reform can be assessed if people felt some positive from this reform. And we have here renowned experts who deal with this topic in essence, and we will give the floor to them. And now I give the floor to represent our results. I give the floor to Mr. Sydorchuk, political analyst of our foundation. Good afternoon. Our organization carried out a survey, national sociological survey. It was carried out in all parts of Ukraine except occupied territories in June this year, and there were some questions on decentralization. So I will compare these results with the previous survey that we carried out in August last year. There were several blocks of questions, and we found out that awareness of people on decentralization increased in this year, and now 18% didn't hear anything about this reform. All others know about it well, or at least heard something about it. And speaking about the regions, there is no sharp difference, and less awareness in the east and other regions. The awareness is even concerning this reform. Also, support increased of this reform, and we asked Ukrainians whether they support the steps made by power in concerning decentralization, and 42% supported it, and 27% didn't support. So this proportion improved during the year, and the majority of Ukrainians support this reform, at least they say so. And if we look at the regions, so the south, they have more of those who cannot answer these questions, but in other regions, the supporters of the reform prevail. And from the other side, and this is a surprise for us, we asked people whether they felt some changes in revenues to local budgets in 2015, 2016, and we saw that the majority, 55%, they said that they didn't feel any changes, and those who felt positive changes and negative changes, these were 16% and 16%. So here is a disturbing moment. Those people who answered that they felt negative changes, this part increased from 8% to 16%, and in the regions we saw that there is difference in the west and in the east, and they felt positive changes, and this prevalence is not very big, but we have it. And in the center and in the south, more citizens felt negative effects, but on the whole, around Ukraine, this is 50-50. Also, we asked those who felt changes what they think about it, and those who said about positive changes, they meant several factors. First place, roads, quality of roads, and this prevails among those who felt changes for the better. And also there were answers about improvement of housing and communal services, and also recreation improved, and also sanitary conditions and urban land improvement. Also fundamental problems that were mentioned by population, but it cannot be resolved during short time. So this is the decrease of medical care, quality, social support, also vulnerable categories and provision of employment. So these are global problems that cannot be resolved by decentralization alone. About voluntary amalgamation of communities, we asked, and the majority said that they know about this reform, and this awareness increased during the year. And also, majority of people support this reform, 31% does not, and there is a prevalence of those who support this reform. And 10% of those who were surveyed, they say that they live in amalgamated communities, and in this 10% we asked them, has their life changed? And the majority said that the living conditions didn't change, and 12% said that it improved or it became worse. So there is support, but there is no feeling of major changes. And the last block, we asked Ukrainians whether Ukrainian power, local power, whether they will be able to complete the responsibilities that are new to them. And there is some skepticism, and the majority they have some doubts, but there is a division half by half, at least.
Добре, да. Зараз чутно, да?
And also we asked whether Ukrainians are satisfied, whether they can influence power. During the last years, we see that the majority are not satisfied, and the situation didn't change over the last year. And at the same time, about 1/3 of Ukrainians are ready to participate in management of the communities using the new instruments provided by reform. And when we asked them what they understand, and this, 42% said that they will take part in elections, and others said about more active forms of participation. The majority of Ukrainians, they are not ready for active participation in administration of their territories, and one of the key tasks of decentralization to improve this involvement of people. Thank you. So we see that our survey have some contradictory results, and people know more about the processes, and people, as a year ago, they continue to support decentralization processes, and they believe that the centers should be shifted at local level. There should be more responsibilities there, and also the assessment of results of decentralization. It is actively implemented, and we know that the local budgets, they increased significantly, but people still dissatisfied. They see new roads, they see this, they see the improvement on the infrastructure. Those who say that the situation changed for the better. Others also see the same. Those who say that something didn't change or changed for worse, but there is a psychological aspect to this. You can see wonderful roads, but if you are not employed, you will say that nothing changed or became worse. So maybe if school is repaired, you feel that this is good, but if a child just runs in the street and you cannot go to some vacation with your child, so they believe that the situation is worse. So the life is more complex than some minor changes. So, and what changes for the worse is provision of medical care. And this year, the reform of health care, it only started. It was not implemented full scale. So we should think about it. Maybe people are too much involved in the development of infrastructure. It is great that roads are repaired. We can see them at once, but maybe we should change priorities in implementation of local governance, especially thinking about healthcare reform and the shift of medical competences at the local level envisaged by the reform. And also people do not see opportunities to influence local power, but it was envisaged that this reform will provide better opportunities to control local power and also provide more opportunities in resolving local problems. And at the same time, people are not ready for this. And there are shocking results in what forms of participation they are ready to participate. So elections, and they are ready to be the voters during elections, just to go to polling stations and vote there for the officials who will manage their towns and cities. So 54%, and in the south, less than 30% are ready to go to polling station and vote once in several years for those who will manage that cities or villages. Also, provision of financial contributions for the communities, 4% in the west center and south, less than 2%, and people are not active. And now I give the floor to our experts, and I have a question to them. Maybe we should shift the priorities in the reform of decentralization, and second, how to involve the community in the implementation of the reform. Maybe in this way, this first problem will resolve, and maybe people will see all the difficulties, what problems can be solved by decentralization and what problems cannot be resolved by it. Now I give the floor to Yuriy, and he will tell us about this.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to correct somewhat on medical reform. Look, the number of unsatisfied is dramatically high. And you see also education, preschool education and school education. The number of those satisfied has been decreasing. The decentralization in the education sector is on the way with in an intensive manner, and the quality of services is being improved, and also attitudes to local authority. Decentralization in the medical sector is not available, and the Ministry of Healthcare supposed that this centralization should be very strict. I forecast if the draft law 6327 will be adopted and all the funding will be focused in one body which is uncontrolled absolutely in 1 year, we can expect very sad events, because decentralization means diversification of risks, risk management decisions. The other bad symptom is threats and skepticism, and also local princes appear. We try to correct this process. The law on procedure of amalgamation, which provides the opportunity for big communities to be created, and the next thing, we should adopt the procedure of control on the legitimacy of decisions issued by local management bodies, local self-governments, because local self-governments, they are absolutely unbalanced as concerned the control over them, because the prosecutor's offices do not control them, and there are no bodies which control legitimacy of acts which issue local self-governments, and this threatens the security, national security of the country. There was a precedent when last year, when 6 amalgamated communities issued a decision on making a contract with the Cabinet of Ministers, and it was adopted and it was broadcast on Russian TV broadcasting channels. There are no legitimate methods on sanctions, potential sanctions on those local radas, which demonstrate their lack of ability to issue legitimate decisions, and they intrude into the state's powers, which what should be done. There is some skepticism growing among the citizens, and I support the Prime Minister who said that the first phase, which is voluntary amalgamation of territorial communities, should be finished as soon as possible. Without the reform of territorial administrative management, no other reform, including security, corruption reforms, the sectoral reforms, led reforms, will not move forward. As an expert, I can state this. So it should be done as fast as possible, and unfortunately we have not passed the equator yet. The opponents, the opposing forces consolidated. This second stage will be forming of sub-regional levels, so the draft law 6636 should be adopted as soon as possible, which delineate the districts' borders. This would help to eliminate the opposition. So here are 3 lines, and a very big disbalance is observed between the budgets, more than 3-fold. This balance is those who received everything from fiscal decentralization. They do not need any more reforms, so they block reforms. They need just money. No responsibility and no increase in competence. Only money. They need this issue should be addressed. We should harmonize the reform and improve the competence, spatial basis, transfer of competences, transfer of responsibility, and correspondence of funding to the powers delegated. If at least one component is not considered, then the reform will go their own way. And we should understand that only 1 year we have for this reform. After that, the election campaign will start and the legislature will not be any longer adequate in their thinking. Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Ivan Lukeria, who is the manager of the project Citizens in Action. First of all, I would like to comment on the results of the survey. How citizens feel, what decentralization provided, what changes they feel. 50% say they do not feel any changes. That's for me the main thing. What citizens say that in general sense there is no improvement in their life conditions. This is the possibility to go abroad, the possibility to get medical services, social welfare services, subsidies, very many services on social protection of citizens is included here. Not only reflected here are the sectors which are in the competence of local self-governments. If you look into details, among those respondents who say that there are improvements for better and breakdown by sectors, infrastructure, housing, transportation. These sectors demonstrate changes and citizens feel them and local self-governments manage them. This is their exclusive competence, where in public opinion the quality of services has not improved enough. It is medical services, anti-corruption efforts, support to low-income citizens, jobs, and we should understand that these spheres are not in the competence of local self-governments in full. For example, social welfare of population is still in the competence of regional and district bodies of public administration. If we look what we have performed the survey among amalgamated communities where they do not feel competence, enough competence. They say that they do not have functions in the medical sector. 80% of respondents said so. To provide primary aid, centers of primary aid, medical aid should be created, and 80% of respondents of amalgamated communities, they said, please provide us, transfer us these powers, then we will significantly improve medical services provision. The next is whether we are too much focused on infrastructure. We should understand that for 20 years Ukraine was on the bottom in ratings on infrastructure, on funding of infrastructure. For example, there is a tenfold Poland invests tenfold of that amount which Ukraine invests into infrastructure. So it is a priority. Renovation of infrastructure is now on the way because it has been destroyed during the last years. As concerns powers to issue decisions, we see that our public is passive. This is a trend. And the second thing, the legislative environment should be created which would empower citizens. Citizens are not interested in taking part in general in decision making. They are interested in education, parents committees creation, funding of schools, control over funding allocated and where they will be spent, for what item they will be spent for. This is a normal practice of funding of civil initiatives. It is only being launched in Ukraine these days, and medical services sector is interested for citizens. Funding of medical services by self-governments, also national funding should be transparent. It was voiced out on the national level, but now the process is intransparent and very high corruption risks are involved in this process. And as concerns participation of citizens and involvement of citizens in the decision making at local level, in local self-government bodies, the local self-government bodies of amalgamated communities which had not unified website, they are creating it now. They are developing consolidated strategies. They introduce practices of funding civil initiatives via civil budgets and other practices. This is on the way now. And if we conduct survey next year, these indicators of public participation in self-government decision making will grow much. And finally, trust in different authorities, local self-governments among state institutions, they have the highest level of confidence. Then goes the army. The confidence in presidential institution, governmental institute, parliamentary institute is about 10 to 13%, while self-governments, town mayors has been growing. For example, town mayors indicator in the survey as concerns regional centers. In 2015, the confidence in town mayors was about 30%. Now it is 45 to 50%. The trend is growing. The confidence in other public institutions of the state, it has been decreasing. So return of confidence in self-governments will be the fundament of the reforms. Thank you. I am giving the floor to Mariya Levonova, coordinator of Development Center UA Center. which is working much on sites. You have conducted many on-site visits. Tell us please about them. You know, we visited 63 towns of Ukraine. We visited all regions of Ukraine, two district centers in each region. Our goal was medical reform, its implementation specifics, access to decision making, access to policy making, and control over public funding spending. Decentralization was the question in focus even without our initiative on sites. In general, we had not survey with optional answers. We heard very many myths and fears available on sites. Everyone understands that decentralization will take part, and this is the only way for the country to move forward. But there are too many illusions and myths that if we fail for the first time, then we will fail in future. Decentralization is a part of medical reform and education reform. The people played their failures on the future which they expect from medical reform and educational reform. We have failed in uniting, in amalgamating into community. Then we will fail in medical and education reform. There are also fears that the community government will also fail. That is why at the same time local self-governments representatives they want to have money in their competence and spend them and incompetence, low competence of those self-governments result in that give us more money but do not give us more powers. Talking about education and medical reform, they are in demand, but local self-governments say we do not want this responsibility for these two reforms. As concerns access to decision making, decentralization allows citizens to take a larger part in decision making. Also, we faced three problems: lack of instruments, lack of tools to engage citizens in decision-making process. This second block is citizens themselves, whether they visit the events they invited for, whether they take part in them. The third block is relationship, interaction, whether the tools are working, the tools for public participation in decision making. People are passive. Local self-governments they had some experience which could be bad experience, and they do not want to proceed with this. They say no, all our attempts failed. In 2011 the activists came, they didn't understand what they want, we will not engage citizens again. So there are problems, they should be addressed, and passive stand of citizens is very often observed on sites. The largest problem is lack of understanding of decision making. They do not understand what is the competence of district Rada, regional Rada, local self-governments, national government. That is why this insatisfaction, it is accumulated because this lack of understanding. The same concern money. People say they haven't felt any effect from decentralization and funds allocated to local level. They do not understand in full that this is local self-government. Thanks to amalgamated community, they resolved their problems. They are not interested how these roads have been built and do not try to influence the processes. The common thing is that people who take decision makers and associations, professional associations, they need tools. They said many times that they have not been provided step-by-step instructions or guidelines or recommendations which they can use in decision making. The same demand is in decentralization in healthcare system. The healthcare institutions managements need instructions and guidelines. The pleasant thing is that people understand that decentralization is the only way to move forward. Thank you. Thank you. Now please questions.
Please introduce yourself first. Andrei Megin, Institute of Liberalism. You said about indicators and maybe there is an error. What is the mathematical error of research? We did it with this is sampling of 2,000 and the errors 2.3. Crimean News, Edward Salatu, Mariya Levonova, using the data provided by our speakers in survey, it is said that negative assessment of employment of Ukrainians, 62 locations were surveyed. So what about this employment problem and whether you discussed this problem? The topic of employment is important at local level, but there is a myth that someone from the top should take the decision in order to provide good employment with high salary to everyone. And people just want to take the responsibility, and the same story we heard concerning healthcare when they said let the ministry tell us what hospitals to close. So they want to resolve the problems that this should be done by central authorities. So we have such problems also. Medics, doctors, they have concerns that because of reform they will have problems with employment, and then they said that maybe there will be lack of doctors. So people say that we will have problems with deployment of graduates of medical institutions, and at the same time we have problems with choice and with the incentives that can be created by amalgamated communities to attract the specialists, and where the situation is the most difficult. So we went on an all-Ukrainian tour, and we believe that there will be a lot of differences in the region, but the problems are the same, and the communication can be different, and the emotions concerning the problems can be different due to some peculiarities. There can be some unique cases when in the regional center there is, for example, some specialized hospitals and it is financed in some special way, but the problems are the same. There were no differences in the problems in the regions. And what about frontline areas, Kherson, and we didn't survey in Crimea, but in frontline areas, they need more support, more help. They want to participate in reforms. They do not want to be excluded from this process due to their geographical position, and also they also compare their success with the success of other regions of Ukraine. They believe that they are able to implement the reforms. Of course, there are some requests for healthcare, but in concerning employment and implementation of the reform, they have the same problems as any other region of Ukraine. And I would like to add about employment. What we observe, we see that where they create amalgamated communities, some opportunities appear. So business goes where they see this single center of control, and there is a competition between amalgamated communities. And now they have competition to have this investment, and one of the heads of amalgamated communities in Lugansk Oblast, they said that a lot of active people fled from this territory. They started to develop. Business people came there, they saw that they have support, and they started their business there. And also there was a myth that amalgamated communities will result in firing and other issues, but we see that people get requalified, and we lack qualified people, and decentralization opens opportunities to select these people and to provide opportunities to them, and also to make them interested to stay there. And if decisions are taken at the local level, the situation is better. And the reform that is proposed by the Ministry of Healthcare is catastrophic for the development of healthcare. This is my personal opinion. One more question. No? Thank you. I would like to say that this is not all that we can propose to you, and on Thursday at 2:30 here in this hall we will hold a press conference about parties and ratings. Please welcome. So we wait for you with new report.